My name is Ben Brabin. I'm hosting the FinTech and Financial Services track today, and I'm here partly because I'm a huge believer in the role that technology properly delivered, properly trustworthy, can deliver in supporting the businesses and the society of tomorrow. So it's a great pleasure to welcome this panel, which is going to be looking at the role of AI in the future and its ethical impact in particular. So without further ado, it's a great privilege to hand over to Manoj. Over to you, Manoj.
Thank you, Ben, and good afternoon, everyone. I'm Manoj Saxena. I'm your moderator for the day today, and we'll be spending the next half an hour or so talking about one of the most important issues I think we will be facing over the next few months and few years, which is how do you use technology and data and artificial intelligence in an ethical and trusted manner. And to help us shed some light on how practitioners are doing this, I have with me today two very distinguished members. Ranil Boteju, who's the Global Head of Data and Analytics at HSBC Wealth and Personal Banking. He'll be joining us soon. And I also have Gavin Munroe, who's a Global CIO for HSBC Retail Banking and Wealth Management. I've had the pleasure of knowing these gentlemen for a couple of years now, and I've always been struck with what I call is their tactical vision, not strategic vision. They understand the power of data, the power of AI, but also they understand it in a very pragmatic way. How do we put it to work in a way that it benefits the customers, it benefits society, and benefits the bank? So today we are going to focus in the session on three topics. What does ethical decisioning or ethical decisioning system mean to retail banking in this new world that we're getting into? And we're also going to talk about what are the opportunities for enabling this for the bank. In every crisis is an opportunity, and given all the pressures that we are seeing with distressed customers, with COVID, and all this struggles around the world on discrimination and bias, I think digital can play an incredibly critical role for the bank. So we'll hear from both of them on how HSBC is looking at this as both an opportunity to serve distressed customers, as well as an opportunity to reimagine their engagement with these customers to build even bigger and stronger connections with their customers. And last but not the least, we'll get some insights into how HSBC is partnering both internally and externally to take on this challenge. So with that, let me bring on Ranil and Gavin onto the screen. So gentlemen, thank you both.
Good afternoon, Manoj. Good afternoon, everyone.
Good afternoon, everybody.
Yeah, thanks again to you both for joining me. So what I'm going to do here is perhaps set the context of what it means to be trusted and ethical when it comes to automated decisioning systems. This doesn't necessarily have to be AI. This could be rules-based systems. These could be statistical systems, or these could be machine learning systems. So I'm going to spend a few minutes setting the context for our audience, and then we will go into a rich panel discussion, which will be the primary focus for our panel here. So with that, let me just launch into this. So when I look at this topic of trust and ethics in digital systems, to me, this statement sort of captures the essence of it. Trust is the foundation of the digital economy. As more and more experiences and engagements and opportunities go online and are driven digitally, data and models, both statistical and machine learning models, are being woven into every application and every engagement. However, there is a challenge that most of these algorithms and models that are being used are working as black boxes. So what I see as the imperative for society and for significant companies and leaders like you is, how do you embed trust as a service into all digital experiences to drive these rich digital experiences? I sort of look at this as something similar to what we had to do when we had to drive the adoption of enterprise web. Enterprise web never took off till security as a service was embedded into it. HTTP alone couldn't do it. You had to go to HTTPS, the HTTP secure, to be able to drive enterprise web. And I believe the same thing's going to happen with enterprise AI. You're going to have embed trust as a service, the HTTP of trust, into all digital experiences before enterprises will allow AI to start improving digital experiences, both for customers as well as their internal colleagues. But as I've started looking at this area, so I've had the good fortune of being IBM's first general manager for Watson. So after the Jeopardy playing game, I was asked to commercialize the Watson program about 8 years ago. And as I started putting Watson to work, and then after that, I've become a venture capitalist funding vertical AI companies, of which CognitiveScale is one of them. What I've started noticing is it's not enough to have an AI give you an answer, but it needs to also start giving you visibility and transparency on 6 key dimensions so that you can be assured that your company policies and your industry regulations are being implemented in a digital world, just like you would do in a physical world. And these 6 dimensions are one of explainability, which is making sure that humans are able to interpret and understand a machine-generated prediction. We're moving to a world where more and more decisions are being given to machines. So how do you make sure that you can look inside the mind of a machine? Bias, there is a lot of bias that's built into data and into models. So it's incredibly important for companies to understand and uncover any bias that may be there in the underlying data. I have read about 2 months ago about a large, bank in the U.S. That was, giving different loan capacity for families with similar economic profiles. So how do you make sure that you prevent these things from happening and treat everyone fairly? Robustness, it is possible for these automated systems to be spoofed. So how do you make sure that you're able to detect some of these adversarial attacks? Compliance, the compliance with things like GDPR or FCA regulations, or in the US, the SEC has a whole bunch of regulations. So how do you ensure that your digital decisioning systems are compliant to these policies? Data risk. Data doesn't stay constant. Data drifts over a period of time. So how do you make sure that your automated decision systems are able to detect data drift? And last but not the least, effectiveness of AI to drive business outcomes. At the end of the day, you do these things so you're delivering business value. And as more and more decisions are getting moved online and are being entrusted to rules or statistical models or to machine learning models, this is something that is going to become a bigger and bigger issue, the need for trusted AI. So that sort of sets up the context for our discussion here. And with that, let me just kind of move over to you all and maybe start with you, Gavin, about your view on what do you see as some of the key customer challenges in this post-COVID world or this COVID world that we are now in?
Yeah, no, it's a good question, Manoj. So the way we're thinking about it at the bank, it goes from just not being able to get to a branch to being able to transfer funds or not make loan payments. So we are HSBC is a global bank, and the digital footprint in Mexico is different to the digital footprint in Hong Kong and Egypt and the US. So we have a lot of different diversity in our digital customer base. And as I said, some of the countries will be mandated to close branches. Some of the countries, governments are offering different loan programs or different loan forgiveness programs. So exposing those to our customers, allowing them to do day-to-day things. Many regulators in the countries have upped the maximum digital transfer limits, tap-to-pay limits, all of those to try and make it easier to navigate this COVID crisis. And we as a bank obviously have to implement those so we can service our customers best as possible.
That's very good. And Ranil, what are you seeing from your perspective?
So Gavin touched on some of the areas where data can really help during this situation. So there's a couple that I want to call out, right? So the first is all over the world, we've had, severe disruption in terms of, all of our branches being open and, lots and lots of customers calling our various contact centers. What we've been able to do is kind of really use data and analytics to really help that, right? So we've created various, kind of tools for our front line so that when someone calls in, they're able to be routed to the closest branch based on real-time data. We've also had to do things like change some of the rules, right? So we have a whole range of decisioning that really looks at people's credit card spend patterns and tries to identify whether there are anomalies, whether they're behaving very differently. And as you know, with the whole world, working from home or being, sort of in lockdown, we've had to really tweak those rules to make sure that we don't get a lot of false positives in terms of fraudulent behavior. So we've really adapted a lot of our decisioning to really adapt to a world where people are their transaction behaviors are very different. So those are two areas where we're definitely starting to see some really good applications of data and analytics to help the situation.
So in other words, you are looking at how do you augment the capabilities of your knowledge workers as your call center demands going up, as your potential fraud thing goes up. You're looking at using data and AI to accelerate that, I guess.
That's right. So one more thing is we're doing a lot of work to identify why people are contacting us. So the demand is unprecedented. Everyone wants to call us, and we've only got so much capacity. We're just not able to cope with such severe spikes. So we've been doing a lot of work to identify why people are calling us and contacting us, and then using a lot of our digital channels to proactively communicate to them so that they don't need to call us. So that's the way to sort of deflect away from some of the frontline colleagues who are really getting swamped at the moment.
So that goes into very well into the next set of questions, and let's take this one by one. So Ranil, continuing on the last thought, so speak a little bit about identifying these distressed customers. How are you approaching this? What is the, what are some of the new techniques that you have put in place that did not exist before March?
Look, I think the first thing is, we're very, very sensitive about how we use customers' data, right? So I think that's the first thing I want to say. And, about a year and a half ago, we came up with a set of principles that really guide how HSBC uses data and in any circumstance. And it's effectively around making sure we always act consistently with our values, that we protect privacy, that we're really clear about what we're using it for. That we address biases, so that's an area of a massive amount of focus. That we're able to track, the capabilities we're using, and that we have the right governance in place as well, right? So that's a set of principles. Now, using those principles, we're able to actually understand some of the account behaviors of customers. So really understanding, we can see, for example, if customers are getting into distress, if they're, for example, if their salaries get stopped, or if they start to really eat into their overdrafts and their credit lines. So we have a pretty good sense of where customers are at in terms of dealing with the unfolding sort of situation. But I think more importantly, we're also investing in digital journeys to really ask customers. So as part of the some of the experiences we're building, we actually want to hear directly from the customers and ask them how they're actually sort of responding and about the situation that's unfolding.
So that's wonderful. Actually, that sets up a conversation I had with Gavin a few weeks ago around this need to rebase customer engagement, as he used those words. So Gavin, do you want to give a little bit more color on how you see a reimagination, a rebasing of customer engagement?
Yeah, if there's one silver lining, if I could even say that, of the COVID thing, is I think we have accelerated the digital adoption significantly. So some of it has been forced, some of it has been voluntary, but we have seen a spike in our digital engagement, and part of that is, as Ranil said, we've accelerated our journeys from servicing as well as customer engagements to be able to service the customers. But that is setting a new baseline for how our customers expect to be engaged. Some people that wouldn't have gone to the digital platform have to go to the digital platform because of the branch footprint in their country. So that's given us a great opportunity to drive this agenda forward. We've redirected significant portions of our 2020 budgets to try and deliver against that. But this is the opportunity to maintain that as well, both from a delivery perspective, but as well as from a regulatory perspective. We have started conversations with our regulators on what that new norm is. In some countries, we're using Zoom to sell now. We weren't doing that beforehand. Some countries created virtual bank branches. We've rolled out WhatsApp and WeChat in various countries to work with our customers. That was on the roadmap before this. it was probably a 12 to 24 month roadmap. So I think the opportunity was to accelerate those, have the expedited conversations with regulators, with dev teams, but the opportunity is to re-baseline that and build on that and not go backwards. To do that, we have to show our customer population that we can deliver on that journey, that vision. But as you mentioned previously, the trust as well to be able to do it. So we're putting a lot more money through our payment systems to digital footprint. We've upped the limits of all those things. That we have to make sure is done in a safe way. That we have to make sure we're managing the fraud in that while we're doing it. Otherwise, it will come back and bite us. So we have to do this in a controlled and managed fashion. But it is exciting to be resetting that baseline going forward.
So speak to me on the other end of it. So one part is obviously reimagining these customer journeys and the digital journeys. What about the other side of it, on the risk management side of things? So one part, like you have said, in order to help customers, you have relaxed and adjusted some of the rules around fraud and abuse and stuff like that. But long term, as you start putting more customers towards on these digital journeys, how do you see the way you understand and assess risk digitally? How do you see that evolving or changing? Either of you want to comment on that?
Yeah, I mean, I'll give you my view, and I'm sure Ranil will build on that. I think with COVID, there's been a heightened elevation of fraud, both against the customer directly from people trying to fish for COVID relief or COVID tests that cost £500 just to run, and then on the bank as well. We've definitely had a heightened focus on fraud internally. As I mentioned, we're running a lot more payments electronically. We are upping our digital limits on all of our stuff. That requires us to have an elevated focus on fraud. And a little bit what you said previously, Manoj, the quality of the data, and to what Ranil said as well, the traditional patterns that we'd be looking for are changed. In the past, we would spot a pattern, somebody buying online suddenly that doesn't buy online. That would spike an amber flag. Well, today that's the norm. Everybody's buying online. So we've had to adjust our models to reflect the change in status quo. However, I think the fraud, the traceability, and the quality of data becomes imperative for us to be able to do this going forward. And the trust that the customers are giving us to be able to manage that is vital for us to do this right.
So one of the questions I have on, sorry, go ahead, Ranil. Do you have a comment?
I was just going to build on Gavin's point that with COVID, we need to really rethink the velocity at which we make credit decisions. So things have changed so quickly for many different types of customers that some of the traditional ways, things like credit bureaus, may not be as accurate as they have been in the past, given the scale of the changes. So one of the things that we're looking into is, can we get more timelier signals to actually assess and understand, things like customers' ability to pay and just their general creditworthiness. So it's an area of very intense activity at the moment to try and get much more timelier insight that we can use to make sure that we meet our customers' needs properly.
That's wonderful. So I have a question also online from Ollie Aldridge here. The question is, how do you balance the tension between building trust with the user, and it says often by revealing algorithms or explaining the how of AI, versus protecting your fintech IP? Okay, and I can give a little bit of a preview on this, and I would love to hear your views. And I think, Ollie, that's a good question, and thanks for asking that. In many cases, what I've seen across companies is when you're engaging the user, the way you build trust is not by explaining how the algorithm works or what the internals of the AI is, but it's more simpler stuff. It's we call it evidence with explanations. So how do you, if your loan is denied, it's not enough to say your loan got denied or your credit limit got increased, but only by so much. It's the ability to then have the algorithm provide explanations also, to say, had your income been a little higher, or had you got 3 less credit cards, you would have qualified for $5,000 more of. So today, the interactions are mostly binary, yes or no. But the ability for AI to explain itself, this was one of the first things I had to do in Watson. It was one thing for Watson to win at Jeopardy and say Toronto is the answer or not, is another thing for a cancer doctor to say, well, how do I know what you are telling me? So Watson had to say, well, these 3 research articles indicate these protocols are successful. So it's important to give not just the answer, but also the explanations behind the answer. That's how you build the trust and how you use the data to come to that answer. But would be eager to hear, Gavin and Ranil, how you balance this, showing how the IP works and what the user needs for trust.
Sure. Let me take this one first, Gavin. So look, I feel for me, right? So if I would answer that question slightly different to you, Manoj, in that I would say that the way that we balance this is having an ethical true north. So I think everyone is familiar. I don't need to mention the names and the scandals that happened 2-3 years ago, but that actually caused all over the world in every single industry related to data some deep soul searching about how do we use big data, how do we use AI and machine learning. What are the ethics of that, right? So everyone everywhere really looked into that. HSBC, one of many companies that went through that process as well. So out of that, we actually came up with a set of fairly kind of clear-cut ethical principles, right? And it's principles related to really treating customers fairly, really managing biases in the data, ensuring that we've got really tight model governance and reviews. Ensuring that we're able to explain the outcomes even to ourselves, and that we do multiple levels of kind of testing. So all of this has given us a degree of confidence that we are using our customers' data for our customers' best interests, and that we have taken an incredibly structured way to look at ethical considerations such as bias control, data privacy, consent, and transparency. And we've built these tests into every single part of the machine learning building journey. So we've kind of put a lot of structure into that. That was one piece. The second thing is, again, right, so I'll be really honest, like 4 or 5 years ago, data ethics was a very niche area. And, since all of the scandals of 3 or 4 years ago, right? So what we had to do was really educate everyone. So we're rolling out some really comprehensive education on data ethics, ML ethics, bias across all levels of the organization, that everyone's got a really clear way to look at these things. So my sense is the combination of a set of principles, much tighter governance, upskilling everyone, plus the use of technology, which I can talk about a bit later. Those things are really how we balance that. One of the things we do need to be careful of is with explainability, right? So there's a fine line between explaining to our customers exactly how decisions are made. So some areas are quite sensitive. So I'll give you an example, right? So credit risk or fraud risk. If we explain how the algorithms work, fraudsters, criminals, they can backward engineer these. So it's definitely something that we're sort of reasonably cautious of. So we do it very carefully so that we don't encourage criminals. So, but that's our approach.
That's very comprehensive, actually. All the 4 dimensions. So you're looking at the end-to-end supply chain of how data and models, and looking at governance of that. You're looking at education. You're looking at implementing your ethical values and defining your true north. So it's really a comprehensive set of actions. Gavin, anything to add from your perspective?
No, as you said, Ranil was pretty comprehensive, and I think I would add one thing. I mean, data is the king to this. So making sure the data quality is right, and we can share that. So when somebody applies for a loan, or somebody applies or gets fraud rejected, sharing that data that was used, and then making sure that that's transparent and the lineage is clean and it doesn't have data drift in it, is something we do put a lot of emphasis on. But as Ranil said, I think a well articulated answer there. So.
Great. Are there some examples that you want to share around hidden biases or discrimination that you have experienced either in HSBC or in other situations in the financial services industries that kind of brought this point home to you?
Well, it's you go first, Gavin.
No, go ahead, Ranil.
So I think the whole concept of biased data and protected classes, it's not new. It's been around for like a while, right? So decades. Credit risk analytics teams have been looking at this for a long time. And what typically people would look at is things like nationality, gender, age, right? So kind of fairly obvious things, right? And basically, in particularly markets like US, right, it's been illegal, criminal to use these variables when you make decisions. So we've not had them for I'd say a decade, right? And then because that's the law in the US, we always like to apply the highest standard ever. So globally, we don't use those. What's happened though over the last 5, 10, maybe 5 years is transaction data, right? So we've really refined our debit and credit card data. We've got lots and lots of signals, and often these can correlate with some of those categories like nationality, ethnicity, gender. So one of the things that we've started to do is, in addition to screening out, variables like, nationality, gender, age, we're also doing what we call second-order effects testing. So we look at some of the transaction signals and make sure they don't correlate with things that we've already stripped out, right? So that's an example of, we have to go to that level, because I'll give you an example, right? If you used credit card spend behavior as an input into a risk model, you could find that certain spend patterns very heavily correlate with ethnic groups, gender, age. So we really want to strip those out, because if you include those, you still end up, kind of biasing your data set. So that's an example of the level of detail that we now have to go to.
That's wonderful.
I think the one part I'd add to that is, as I mentioned previously, we are a global bank. So when we have solutions like online sign up, where we scan your passport or your ID, or we do NLP and stuff like that, we have to make sure we don't apply one solution across the globe. So the learning of the algorithm for Mexico could be different and have different outcomes for that of Hong Kong and or Middle East. So building the right nuances for a region is important for us. We like to have global architecture. We like to have global platforms, but that doesn't mean the model. It doesn't mean the domain knowledge in that solution is applicable to every region. So that's something we do recognize, and when we deploy these models and or algorithms to country-specific solutions, we have to be cognizant of that fact, and it's something that we've learned through the time.
So Gavin, you had Ranil, you had mentioned earlier about some newer ways in which you're beginning to tackle this. Can you give us a little bit more color on how you framed this? One was the education component, but when you get to activation and scaling, how are you approaching the whole educate, activate, scale type of continuum?
So on the scale side, so we basically had to look at some tech options, right? So basically, there is a lot of work to do, right? So if you really want to understand whether your data sets and your outcomes are robust, whether the data is fair and unbiased, whether they're, the transparency, right? So if you did that manually and just use data scientists to do that, it takes a long time. Like, we have hundreds and hundreds of machine learning algorithms. We need to run these multiple times before we deploy, and then we need to continuously monitor those. So that could end up becoming a massive industry. So we've started to use look at a whole range of tools, right? So there's the CogScale tool. We're starting to use that. We're running some kind of POCs on that to assess whether we can use the technology to actually automate this. So that gives us the confidence. So that's one. We're also looking at a whole range of model monitoring capabilities as well. And then, it's common knowledge. I think Google announced last year that they've got their explainable AI. So there's a number of solutions on the market. We're looking for, something that actually takes the grunt work away from us, and just automates a lot of that, because it is very manual.
It's almost like a quality management for an AI supply chain, isn't it?
That's right. And
it's automating testing and quality for AI supply chain, but in a much more dynamic and
it's got to be dynamic. Yeah. So with machine learning models, right? So if they're getting kind of recalibrated on a much more regular basis, it means you need to kind of monitor things, almost on a daily basis or live, right? Because some of the underlying data may drift. You may get different outcomes. Labels may change. So there's a whole bunch of regular monitoring that is quite manual and labor intensive, which we want to automate.
Yep. Great. Gavin, anything to add to that?
Yeah, I think I'd add exactly what Ranil said. I would say that we're not the specialists in facial recognition. We're not the specialists in doc scanning. We partner with companies that are doing it, like Google and everybody else, to get the best of the breed. I think Manoj, you used the term once, AI for AI. We're in the phase now where it still takes a little bit of manual muscle power to get this through. The demand's only going to get larger. I think as we move into a digital environment and we come out of this COVID crisis, the use of AI, the use of modeling will just accelerate. So what we call is we haven't industrialized this yet. We're looking at tools like Ranil said. We are making sure we've built the lineage of data and stuff like that. But I think to go to that next level, you need to automate that. You need to have platforms and technology in the middle of that to be able to industrialize it. And I think that's the next step of this journey.
Yep. Well, speaking from the side of CognitiveScale, it's been fascinating to watch, not just as a technology provider to you all, but also the comprehensive way and the customer-driven way in which you guys have gone about picking the use cases and driving this. One question we have from the audience is: Are you exploring the use of alternative data for credit decisioning, such as psychometric data, utility bills, or non-financial data?
So I'll be honest and say, as a bank, right? So we're not a fintech startup. We're a bank, been around for 150 years, full service, 38 million customers. We have a shed load of data, right? So basically, the data that we have on our current customers is absolutely adequate. We're not even scratching the surface on using that. When it comes to some of the obviously customers that we haven't banked before, absolutely, that's an area that we can really start to explore some of these alternative data. But the key thing for us is the data supply chain that Gavin mentioned before, right? We want to be absolutely certain that any external data that we use has had the right consent, that customers would absolutely be comfortable that we're using the data in the way that it was intended to be used. So that's been a really big shift over the last few years, right? With GDPR, even with data, consent legislation, and even in places like China, people now really understand that if we use data, we need to make sure that customers would be comfortable with how we're using it. If it's external or third-party data. Yeah,
no, that's well said. So let me also then move on to the next question around. This is more technology-centric. What do you see the role of a hybrid multi-cloud infrastructure and AI in this journey that you are on, both to reimagine and rebase customer engagement, as well as reassess and tune your risk and decisioning systems in the back end? So how do you see? It's a two-part question. One is the hybrid and multi-cloud infrastructure, and second is AI. How do you see a role of both of those? Maybe any of you can start. Gavin, you want to go first?
Sure, yeah. So, in a pristine world, we could put up a single cloud environment and we could be dedicated to that, but we don't live in that pristine world. So we're definitely going to be living in a hybrid cloud or multi-cloud environment. Some of our fintechs only run on certain cloud providers, and we have obviously building an internal cloud as well. So I think that's the new norm. We will be bridging different cloud providers for different parts of the ecosystem. When you look at how we're approaching it from a cloud agnostic solution, we are making conscious decisions to design some of our solutions cloud agnostic so that we can deploy them. We are, like I said multiple times, we are a global bank. We don't want data centers in every country, and some countries require us to have in-country data. So we have to rely on the cloud as part of our cost equation. And we have to find the right provider in there. So we do business in Hong Kong, we do business in China, we do business in Mexico, we do business in the US. They've all got different strengths and maturities of offerings, either through fintechs or partners. So as we look at this multi-cloud environment, I think our architectural decisions on how we store AI data in one solution versus analytical versus transactional data in the other one has to be an active decision, not an organic decision, because that will create complexity in solution. When we think about how does AI run on that, we want to be able to lift and shift these solutions to whatever country you want to use. Like I mentioned before, we might have a solution, a global solution, but it's got to be deployed into that country. It's got to learn and go through that maturing process in country for various reasons. And we can't always be pushing our cloud provider that we used in one country into that next solution. So we are building cloud agnostic solutions that can do it. And obviously that's where we look at things like containers and stuff like that. And the hope is, or the strategy that is, I shouldn't say hope, but the strategy is, as we build AI on top of those solutions, to be able to have the layer over there that we could just lift and shift and drop it in there. And cloud allows us to do it if we design it the right way with a containerized solution.
So it's in essence, it's making those AI workloads portable across regions and across clouds, and sort of redoing the whole architecture. I call it the shift from a .com architecture to a .ai architecture, because the last time you probably did something that significant was probably when the web came about 25 years ago, because you're essentially reimagining the infrastructure, the data, and the experience, all of them. And then as a large bank, you have to do that not just across business lines, but across countries.
Exactly, and it's complicated. So we have regulatory requirements where data has to be in country. We have data center footprints where we will or will not have coverage, and then we have accelerated journeys where we don't have time to build from scratch. So all the combination of all of those require us to have this agnostic and or multi-cloud approach, and then the architectural decisions you make need to be able to give you exactly what you're describing there. That lift and drop, or that layer that comes over it. We would like to have one solution fits all, but there's never going to be one to rule all. That's not going to happen.
Yep, and this is definitely something we're living through, right? So this is, multi-cloud is a reality. Like for large organizations, it's something that it's here and we're working through it.
That's great. Also, I think, Gavin, can you give a little bit more color? I like the way when you were talking about reimagining the whole end-to-end supply chain of credit cards and those processes, the shared services layer that you talked about. You said there are some services that are country specific, but there are some common services. This is not at an infrastructure level, but this is at an application layer, that there are some shared services that power multiple, that could power the same credit card stuff across countries. Can you give a little bit more color on that comment?
Yeah, sure. So, if you look at the credit card, we all know what a credit card is. We've got a credit card, we've got a debit card. Is it unique? No, it's not unique. However, there's implementations that are unique, or it's the customer experience through a digital or through a servicing perspective that makes it unique. We have multiple card platforms by region. Some of them are overlapping, some of them are not. But that's not the differentiator. So when you look at what we've done, for example, in Mexico, we're partnering with a fintech over there to change the experience. That fintech might or might not be an applicable solution in Australia. So the ability to plug in those different fintechs where they have an advantage for HSBC, where we can differentiate ourselves, is key. We don't want to build that infrastructure on-prem. We don't want to have a behemoth behind all that. So that flexibility that we can differentiate ourselves on something as common as a card, and it's been around forever and it's not going to go away. But we want to differentiate ourselves, and we want to provide that service and or that fintech innovation. So the ability to deploy those into the cloud, the adaptability and integration around that is key for us. And I think that lends itself to that multi-cloud environment, to the ability to innovate fast and drive that innovation so the customer can get it as quick as possible.
That's wonderful. So one last question. I think we have about 3 or 4 minutes left here. As you look ahead, as you look at the next 12 months, what does good or great look like for each of you? So maybe, Ranil, let me start with you.
For me, I'm going to put something a bit out there, a bit aspirational, right? So people all over the world trust HSBC with their most prized possessions. So their pension funds, their mortgage, educating their kids, insuring their lives. We have a lot of trust related to something that people care very deeply about. What I'm really hoping is that, the combination of our really structured approach to the ethical use of data, plus the fact that we're not commercializing our customers' data, we're not selling it or driving advertising revenue off it, we're actually using it for our customers. My kind of great for me looks like we achieve a level of trust in how we are using our customers' data and, how we are a steward of their data in the same way they trust us with their money.
Yeah, wonderfully put. Gavin?
No, that was great put up. For me, I think building on the new expectation that's been set by our customers, building on the new trust that we've built with them. To do that, we have to figure out how to scale, and we spoke about it previously. So for me, scaling on what we've built. Love to leverage the benefits of the new norm coming out of this, and I think that's the opportunity we have here. How to scale, industrialize that.
Wonderful. That was a very comprehensive set of topics we covered. Everything from the true north of ethics to hybrid cloud and containers. And I want to thank both of you for the time this morning. We do have a few questions here that we're going to move into a separate breakout at the top of the hour. and we'll field the questions from the audience. So we'll connect back in about 20 minutes in a separate session. Thank you again. Thank you both.
Thank you, Manoj.
Thank you, Manoj.
Back to you.
Manoj, thank you very much. Gentlemen, thank you both very much indeed. What a fantastic combination of insights, and great to get the perspective of an institution with 38 million customers and 150-year perspective to bring to bear on what, after all, as I think each of you has described, is a situation of accelerating challenge. Maintaining trust while dealing with change, which is itself coming about at a faster rate, of course, is a great challenge and a great test for us all. So I think, once again, this theme of trust has dominated the fintech and financial services stage today. It's a great pleasure to have your perspectives. And of course, now is an opportunity for those with appropriate tickets to ask you questions in quarter of an hour. So if you are able to return in a quarter of an hour for the Q&A, please take a short break, maybe a pit stop, and come back with your questions ready. I think just to sum it up, we have here a fantastic insight into trust as we accelerate. We move faster across the roadmap. We make sure that we bring the passengers with us. But this challenge is not for the faint-hearted, and it's great to have had your perspectives and your insights, gentlemen, today. Thank you very much indeed.
My pleasure. Thank you.
My pleasure.
Want access to more CogX videos? Subscribe now for free at cogx.co.